Hey everybody, and welcome to week 2 of Advent at Sycamore. I hope you had a great week. I hope you've had an opportunity to open your Advent in a box, and hope you've got your candle and lit it at home as that constant reminder that God is with us. I think you all should know that I got a new phone recently, and I know what I'm about to say is a little weird in an era of waterproof devices and face recognition software and triple cameras, but I really like the battery. And I have to say that, part of that reason is just because the battery in my old phone was so bad. It was literally on its last leg. My phone was 5 or 6 years old, I can't remember. And so every morning I would have it plugged into the wall next to my nightstand, and I would take it from there and then plug it into the car on my drive into the office. And then I would unplug it and then plug it into the wall while I sat at my desk. And if I, took more than just a few photos or streamed a YouTube video, it was pretty much a guarantee that I was going to get the black screen and have to recharge before I could use it for anything else. My new phone lasts for like 2 days on a charge. It's absolutely incredible. My old phone I had had since August, and I knew I needed one, but it was just one of those things where I wasn't getting around to getting a new one. And then I heard that a few new phones that I was interested in were coming out in November, so I just decided to wait. And so as September and October ticked by, my anticipation and enthusiasm and excitement grew for the chance that I would have to check out these new phones and ultimately to do that upgrade. What I mistakenly did, though, was that I showed up to the Verizon store the first week of November only to realize that 2 of the 3 phones I was interested in only came out for pre-order the first week of November and weren't actually going to be available in store until the middle of the month. I can't even tell you the emotional roller coaster that this put me on. But eventually I came down, kind of calmed myself, and then I looked forward, and again, just like from August to November, I was counting down the days. It was those 2 weeks that I was counting down the days until I could finally get in the store and get my new device. I think that's a little bit of a picture, a window into the way that life was for Jews in the first century. You see, at this moment in their history, at the moment when Jesus came to planet Earth, they were living in the tension between God's promises and their circumstances. God had promised them good things, really good things, but they hadn't come true yet. And as more and more time went by, as years turned into decades, turned into centuries, as one generation passed to the next generation, and the promises still didn't come to pass, people were losing hope. People were wondering if the promises could really be trusted. I hope that one of the first questions that your groups asked as you just read the passage that is ours for today is, why in the world did Matthew open like this? Matthew wrote his gospel to a Jewish audience. And I think Matthew knew that he was writing into this tension that they were experiencing between promises and circumstances. And so he expressed the hope of the gospel in a way that it would have immediately grabbed their attention. The Jews valued where people came from. Their identity was tied to their lineage because their lineage was that of the people of God. Genealogies were very important to them because through genealogies they could confirm their connection with God, and importantly, they could claim the promises that God had made to their ancestors. Matthew was speaking their language when he began his Christmas story. The question that his audience likely asked, though, and it's the same question for us today, is why did Matthew organize his genealogy the way that he did, into these 3 big sections of history punctuated by 4 incredibly important moments. Moments focused on Abraham, David, the Babylonian exile, and the coming of Jesus, who he calls the Messiah. What was Matthew saying? I think that Matthew was offering them both an encouragement and a challenge. On the one hand, he was offering them the encouragement that yes, all of God's promises had come true, and they had come true. They'd been fulfilled in this man, Jesus. But he was also telling them and telling us that they came true in Jesus in a way that was completely unexpected. And he didn't want them to miss what had happened. Let's look at both this encouragement and this challenge together and see what God might be saying to us. Abraham and David are two of the biggest names of the Jewish Bible and of the Old Testament of the Christian Bible. That's because Abraham is the father of Judaism and David is the father of the Messiah. Messiah just being this Hebrew word that literally translates to anointed one. Now, Abraham had been a Middle Eastern farmer when God broke into his life. At that time, his name was Abram, and as we read in Genesis 12, God made him this great promise. He says, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and I will make you a blessing. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you. The problem with this promise was that Abram's wife Sarai was barren and couldn't have kids. But then there's God, whose promises are always bigger than human problems. He again comes to Abram in Genesis 17 and tells him, this is my covenant, or this is my promise, this is my guarantee with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you, and your descendants after you for generations to come, to be your God and to be the God of your descendants after you. This is where Judaism began. It's where Christianity began, as a relationship that God initiated with Abraham and that everyone in Abraham's genealogy would enjoy. Just as God chose Abraham to be a father, he chose David to be a king. David turned out to be the greatest king of Israel, the greatest king of God's people, because he honored God, and in turn God blessed him and made him prosperous. We read in 2 Samuel chapter 7, God says this to David, when your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. In Abraham, God gave the promise to his people, I will be with you forever, and you will be mine forever. And in David, he gave them the promise, I won't just be with you, but I'll bless you forever. Jesus was in the line of both Abraham and David. And by showing people this, Matthew was saying, look, don't you see what this means? God's promises have come true, and they've come true in Jesus. The thing, though, is that people could have looked up this genealogy stuff for themselves in the public records of the Jews. It wasn't hidden information. So how had so many people missed Jesus? Why was it that so few Jews believed that Jesus was the fulfillment to all of these great Old Testament promises? I think this is where the rest of Matthew's genealogy is important. And as I've been reflecting on it this week, I think Matthew was communicating something deeply personal through it. This week, I've been thinking about Matthew. I've been trying to imagine myself as him and to understand why he wrote the way that he did. What was it, in other words, about his story, his experience of Jesus, his relationship with this God-man that informed his writing? I already mentioned that Matthew was a Jew, but for a significant portion of his life, he might as well have not been. See, Matthew had been a tax collector, and in becoming one, he had forsaken his identity. He had forsaken his people, because in essence, he had sided with the Romans in their oppression against the Jews. So part of their strategy became to employ locals to handle certain public tasks within the kingdom. And tax collecting ended up being one of those tasks. For a local person to do this, though, it would have made them appear absolutely heartless towards their own people with whom they lived. Roman taxes were oppressive to many people, and they were absolutely insulting to everyone, every nation that had been conquered. I mean, imagine living in the United States and having all of our history and our traditions, a land that was ours, but then being overtaken or owned by, I don't know, Mexico or Canada, right? Never going to happen, but just go there with me, right? How embarrassed would you feel? Right? I mean, how resentful would you be being under someone else's rule while you lived in your own home, or tried to work your own business, or spent time with friends and family in your neighborhood or your community? Now, Matthew had most likely made quite a life for himself, right? He made a lot of money, not just from the wages that he would have received from Rome, but tax collectors were notorious for overcharging people who owed taxes so that they could keep the difference before handing the balance over to Rome. So he was surely rich, he surely had a nice house, he surely wore nicer clothes than everybody else. If you would have lined him up with other people in the community and seen him from the outside and maybe come to the conclusion that he had it all together, that he was living a better life than everybody else, I have to believe that he was absolutely broken on the inside. I have to believe that he was utterly alone, because he was just a pawn for the Romans. They weren't really his friends. But everyone who he had ever known, his friends and family and community members, had turned their backs on him because he had turned his back on them. I have to believe that Matthew felt absolutely enslaved in his position. He was completely under the authority and the agenda of Rome, but it's not like he could have just quit and go start a new life for himself. He had burned every bridge, and there was no going back. Nobody was going to take him in. Nobody wanted to be with Matthew. And then there was Jesus. And there was that day when Jesus passed by Matthew's tax collector's booth, and he saw him, and he didn't judge him, but he called out to him, "Follow me. Join me. Come and be with me. Experience life with me, Matthew. I want to be with you." I think people missed Jesus because their circumstances didn't align with God's promises, or maybe better said, they didn't align with their expectations based on how they thought God should fulfill his promises. They thought that God's promise to send an eternal king was going to be in the flesh, that a strong political force or military leader would overthrow the Roman Empire, would regain their homeland and elevate them to a status that was over all the other nations in the world. But Jesus came as a different kind of king. He came as the King of heaven, offering to be the king of our hearts. And this is the king. This is the man who I believe Matthew came to know, and who he so desperately wanted to communicate to his audience and to communicate to us. At the time of Jesus, people had been holding on to God's promises for a long time, and a long time was turning into too long. And for some people, too long to hope anymore. Too long to hang on, too long to believe that God was still good, that God really did want to be with them forever, that he really did want to bless them forever. Has life ever felt like that to you? Have you ever been in a situation where maybe you didn't verbalize it, but in your head you were asking those same kinds of questions? Is God good? Does he love me? Does he care about me? Are there any blessings that are going to come my way anytime soon? How about us this year? As we celebrate Advent and look forward to Christmas, Where are we with this passage, with this message that Matthew is communicating, that God has always been and will always be with the hopeless, and that in Jesus we have a guarantee that He's with us and that He'll bless us forever? At the beginning of these remarks, I suggested that Matthew was offering both an encouragement and a challenge to his audience. Where are you at with those two words right now? Are you feeling encouraged by these words, by the fact that God is a promise keeper, that He's with the hopeless, that Jesus is evident, that He's constantly reaching out to a broken world, looking to pull them into a relationship with Himself, eager to bless them now and for all time? Or are you feeling challenged? Are you feeling like, if I'm honest, I've missed Jesus so far this season. I've been missing Jesus the past few months. I've kind of put Jesus on the back burner since coronavirus started to impact our culture. Now, if you're the latter, I just want to pause for a second, because our intentions here are never to push you towards guilt and shame, because it's not what Jesus does. Every single one of God's challenges are challenges of love. His desire is always to be with us. It's why Jesus came. So if you're feeling challenged, it's not because God wants you to feel bad about something or He's mad at you and He wants you to know it. Instead, it's probably because He knows that there's a distance between the two of you, and He wants you to turn and come back. We're going to take some time now to reflect on this passage and to discuss it with each other, and your group leaders are going to facilitate you through these couple of questions. The first is this: what about today's passage or message most stands out to you? And I encourage you to think through those two words, encouraged or challenged. And if you're so bold, go ahead and share why you think that is. And then after that, consider this question: how do you sense God inviting you personally to respond to what He said to us today? As always, I'm so grateful for this time that we get to spend together. Have a great time in your groups and a great week ahead.